Right. Okay. We should be recording now. So tonight's session is on academic language. And like I said, a good part of the Ed TPA is going to be asking you about how you're supporting students with academic language demands. So I want to really kind of take a deep dive into what are academic language demands and how do we support our students with these. All right. So our agenda tonight, we'll go over our lesson objectives. We will review what are academic language demands. You are a little bit familiar with them, I'm going to assume, because they are on your Be a Teacher lesson plan, all right? And I do want to say this, though. I'm looking at you all, and I'm not sure if Isaiah's on here yet. I don't think so. Teachers that are world language teachers or candidates that are world language teachers do not have to address academic language demands. So, which is it's interesting to me, but they don't. And on their lesson plans, they are not asked to address academic language demands. However, all the rest of you are. If you're not a world language teacher, then on your Be a Teacher lesson plan, it talks about academic language demands and support. All right. So also tonight, we're going to introduce the final project. So this is a big one. It is our capstone project. So yeah, I want to make sure everybody understands it. I will also preview that week 6 online class. And when I say online, I mean that you're doing your thing. So you don't need to Zoom in for week 6. I want to provide you time because the assignment that's associated with week 6 is a significant one. So we'll go over that and you'll understand what the expectations are for that. There is a Canvas formative assessment for this session. Okay. Oh, there's, yeah, okay. So our learning objectives for tonight, we're going to define academic language. So we're all on the same page about what that means. We're going to identify the 4 academic language demands. We're going to explore them and how you will address them in your instruction. And I want you, again, to understand the requirements for the final project and understand the scope and sequence of the assignments that are associated with next week's online class or next week's independent class, okay? And Isaiah, you just joined us. I do want to say, and I said this before you got on, I wasn't sure whether you're going to Zoom in with us. This whole thing about academic language and academic language demands is not in your world of world language. It's not on your lesson plan. However, and I do want to make this pitch to you, but I know that your field supervisor feels strongly that you don't need to swim in this pool at all. But I know that you are teaching a heritage language class. And so potentially you are teaching students, you're basically teaching a literature class or a language arts class, but you're doing it in Spanish. They are reading in Spanish, they're writing in Spanish. And even if you weren't teaching a heritage language, you would be doing, you could be doing an AP, for instance, an AP language class. And in which case, again, they're reading and writing and demonstrating literacy in their in that second language. So and that's all about academic language demands. So it's interesting to me that they kind of opt you out of this as a world language teacher. I get it if you're just teaching like a level 1 language, but once you get up into the higher levels, your students end up doing exactly what they would do in a language arts class, but in their in the language that they're that they're learning. So that's my pitch for you as a world language teacher. So I hope you stay with us and kind of ride this wave. But if you decide you don't want to, I understand that too. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. I guess yeah, I'll hang out because I do have that heritage course, and I that's kind of how I apply this course
Hmm.
to my teaching. So yeah, I could hang out.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to click through this. There are a lot of universal TPEs we're addressing in tonight's class and in the capstone project. And I think this is why, because the capstone project is really mimicking or getting you ready for the Ed TPA. And when you think about what you're doing in the Ed TPA, you are demonstrating your knowledge or your understanding of these universal TPEs. And the more they can have multiple TPEs in one task, the better. So when I give you this, this task, this project, you're going to be utilizing or showing evidence of a lot of these universal TPEs. Okay, so there we go. There's a bunch of them. All right. So academic language. What is it? It is the oral, so the spoken and the written language that's used for academic purposes. All right. So again, it's what we're doing in the classroom with our students, how they're speaking, how we're speaking, how they are writing, how they are reading. This is all academic language for academic purposes. So it's used to engage students in learning and includes the means by which students develop and express content understandings. Okay. So they are learning through academic language because they're reading it in their texts. They're listening to your lectures using the language of the subject, and they are communicating their understanding of your subject by through language, through academic language. Okay. So when you're completing the Ed TPA, you are charged with, you must consider the academic language or language demands that are present in your learning segment. And I'll talk more about this to kind of make this clearer. So you're considering what language demands are present so that you can support your students in their learning and their language development. Okay. So as you're thinking about what tasks you're going to have your students complete, how they're going to show what they know, you're thinking about how do they have to use language? Are they going to be using language in a written format? Are they going to be using language orally? Are they going to be using language by listening to a lecture or that kind of thing? Okay. So when we talk about academic language, we're talking about language demands. What demands are we making on our students? What do they need to be able to know and be able to do around language, if that makes sense? I hope that makes sense. Okay. So we have 4 different language demands, and I'm going to go into each one individually. All right. But let's kind of do an overview of the language demands. And I have these icons next to these different demands that I'll go through for a reason, because to me, I think that it helps to have a picture to kind of wrap your mind around. So our first one is language function. And these are those verbs that we use as we are writing our lesson plan about what we want our students to do with the language. They're going to analyze or compare, or they're going to describe or evaluate or formulate, whatever. These are language functions. All right. This is how they're going to use language to show what they know. Okay. So that's the language function. Again, we'll talk more about that in a little bit. This next language demand is vocabulary or symbols in math. And I like to think of them as like bricks. They are like individual words, right? Vocabulary word is like an individual brick, okay? Then you have syntax. And syntax is the way that those words or bricks are organized. In English, the basic sentence is subject, verb, object, right? So those bricks are set up a certain way. In English, we have our adjective word in front of our noun, right? So we say the red wagon, not so we have those bricks organized a certain way, those words. Okay, that's syntax. And then discourse is what you build with this. Okay, so you've got your bricks, you've made a design, and you build something. So a discourse would be what are you it would be an essay or a lab report. Okay, so I hope that sort of that vision or that visual, those make sense. Okay, so let's go into language functions and to kind of take a more of a deep dive into what language function. So it's the purpose for which the language is used. Why are students using language? Okay, it's often represented by the active verbs within the learning outcomes. All right, so I have a bunch here. Whoops, shoot. Well, here they are. I have them in your materials too. I just clicked on it, so it gave me but analyze, compare, contrast, describe, evaluate, explain, formulate, infer, justify, predict, summarize, support. These are, there's way more than this, but these are sort of the ones that you see quite a bit, or that we ask our students to do quite often, particularly in assessment, right? What you will not see, math teachers, is solve on this. Solve is not a language function, and I will go into that a little bit more, okay? You know what? I want to get back into the slideshow so that works like this. Okay. Okay. So this, when you're thinking about language function, you're thinking you kind of finish this sentence starter. Students will be able to blank. They will be able to compare. They will be able to contrast. They will be able to infer. Okay. Now, I'm going to actually, I think I'm going to click out of this first, and I want to share with you in the chat session 5 materials so that you just have it easy at your fingertips. So let me get into the chat. And all right, so that is the folder. If you go in there, you're going to see the slide deck, and you're going to see a bunch of things in there. You'll see session 5 support documents, and some of the things I'm going to be pulling from right now or showing you is in that folder. Okay, so let me get in here. So this is gold, guys. This academic language function toolkit. Right? When you are writing your lesson plan, when you are doing your EdTPA, when you're doing the final project for this class, this toolkit will be particularly helpful. Okay. I think it would be great to just go through and read it, kind of an understanding about academic language. Jeff Swears, Kate Kinsella are quoted in here. So these are some heavy hitters in the world of literacy and academic language. So it will also kind of give you some examples. I think one way of kind of framing is, we know what informal language is. Kids talk kind of in slang. They repeat words. They can randomly sort of start sentences with and but, and it's not that that's incorrect as long as a full sentence follows and or but it's not really done sort of in academia. And academic language has more sophisticated vocabulary, sentences that often start with, say a transition like however or moreover, those sorts of things, longer sentences. And one of the things that academic language does is just ups the register, right? A more academic register as opposed to a more informal register that the kids are used to speaking on the playground or on the, in the quad sort of a thing. We'll talk more. You'll see a video that talks about this idea of academic vocabulary as being the bricks and academic discourse as being the mortar. So we'll do that. But this is what I love about this toolkit. Let's say you're going to have your students, actually I'm going to go here, like summarizing and informing. So students are going to describe, let's say, that's one of our language functions. They're going to describe, and they're going to maybe retell a personal experience. And some strategies that we can use for them are like writing frames. We can give them cue words to help support that that idea. And here we've got like the language of summarizing. There's some sentence starters here. We have some sentence starters for the language of informing. And then also here are graphic organizers that would go with that idea. So why do we care about this stuff? It's because when you have identified a language function, it also asks you on your lesson plan, what is your support for that language function? How are you going to help students with that? Supports are these graphic organizers, for instance. Supports are sentence frames. Supports are sentence starters, those kinds of things, all right? Here's comparing and contrasting. Same thing. It gives you kind of examples of what students might do in comparing and contrasting. And then what are some cue words they might be using, some vocabulary that you might be introducing to help support them in comparing and contrasting. Like, conversely or despite or on the other hand, and then giving them sentence frames and graphic organizers. So anyway, sequencing and ordering. And so it goes all the way through. So I'm going to, forgive me because I'm going to go this quickly because I want to show you at the end here also. So cause and effect. At the end, they give you also some kind of talk moves. So ways that students can participate in academic discourse and helping them with sentence starters to participate in academic discussion. Okay. So anyway, this is a great tool. And if I were you, what I think I would do is I would open, I think you all are kind of working in the world of Google, right? I would open a Google folder and I would call the folder EdTPA academic language, let's say, and I would just start feeding things into it like this. And some of the resources that I'm going to give you tonight, throw it into the folder so that when the time comes when you really are ready to dig in, you have it all in one place. Okay. That said, you can always come back to session 5 to that folder and you'll find all of this there. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I just want to see if you have any questions or if so far so good. Are we academic or the language function makes sense? What we're doing. Okay. Fantastic. Okay. So let me get back. Right. Get into slideshow. All right. So language function, so how we're using the language, for what purpose are we using the language? That's the language function. I've seen it, a graphic for language function as a tool, that we're using language as a tool for something. What are we want the students to do with the language? All right, so now let's talk about vocabulary. And this probably, for all of us, this is probably the easiest, most familiar thing is vocabulary. So vocabulary are words, phrases, symbols that are used within our particular disciplines. And you've heard, I'm sure, that the tiers of vocabulary, where tier one, now I want to make a distinction here. Tier one, we often hear are words that are really simple: dog, tree, house, a lot of nouns, um, simple nouns, words you would find, or simple verbs, words you'd find in little learning to read books and things like that. Those are tier one words. However, when we talk about tier one in terms of academic vocabulary and academic language, we're talking about those simple words that have subject-specific meanings that differ depending on the subject that you're in. For instance, a word like product, okay? Product would be a different, we know it would be different in math, product, versus in econ, if you're taking an economics class. Or division would be different, again, in math compared to, say, if you were talking in social studies. Or the word negative, again, math could be different. It might be different in photography, and it could also be different in, the way it would be used in talking about positive outcomes and negative outcomes, right? So tier one words, when we talk about academic vocabulary, let's think about those words that we need to be really clear with our students how we're using that word for our subject matter and how that word is used in our specific discipline. Okay. Tier two words are just general academic vocabulary words that are used across disciplines. And often we think, those tier two words often can be our language function words, like analyze or explain or evaluate. Tier two words often are used in assessment, on tests, right? Explain this, analyze this, justify that. Those are tier two words. They're not all verbs, but they're words that they can be nouns as well. But there's an academic register to them. Okay, they're more sophisticated words. And then tier three words are those subject specific words or symbols that are used in the discipline. Words like mitosis or monarchy or a sonata or isosceles. So they're used specifically in a subject, in a subject, all right? In math, the sign for pi, that's, it's a specific symbol and it's specific to that subject. Okay, so tier one, two, and three. Okay, vocabulary, but they're words, they're bricks. 1, 2, 3, right? They're words. Okay, so I want to show you a video now where she talks about this idea of vocabulary and how do we explicitly teach vocabulary. And also she introduces this idea of bricks and mortar words. All right, so let me.
My name is Mary Beth Curtis. I'm a professor of education here at Lesley University, where I also direct the Center for Special Education. For the past 30 years or so, my research and clinical work has focused on how reading develops and what fails to develop or develops differently when students have difficulty with reading. And over the past couple of years, I've been working with students who are at risk for reading failure and as a consequence at risk for dropping out of school. And in looking at those students and trying to figure out what sorts of things they were good at and what sorts of things they were having difficulty with, we were struck in our testing by how many of those students had difficulty in vocabulary. When we think about why explicit vocabulary instruction is important for adolescents and important for teachers of students of adolescents, whether they be English language arts teachers or content area teachers, I always go back to the relationship between vocabulary and comprehension. Vocabulary is also a consequence of how well you comprehend. If you're a good comprehender, you're going to have lots of opportunities to learn new word meanings from context. But if you're having difficulty in comprehending, you're going to have a really hard time learning those word meanings on your own. Direct and explicit vocabulary instruction is certainly the first principle that the research supports. It's particularly important when you're working with students who are learning new vocabulary that they have the opportunity to have the information explained to them directly, to have opportunities then to apply that information guided by their teachers, and then finally opportunities to apply it independently. Another principle that we want to make sure that we incorporate in our vocabulary instruction is multiple opportunities to learn the new word meanings or the vocabulary skills that we're teaching. In addition to these multiple encounters, we want to make sure that these multiple encounters are occurring in varied contexts. An example I can think of is a student, I asked him if he knew what desist meant. And he said, yeah, he said, my high school teacher says that, cease and desist. And I said to him, okay, what does it mean? He said, well, I think it means sit down, shut up, and pay attention. And finally, in addition to direct and explicit instruction, multiple opportunities in varied contexts, we want to make sure that the tasks that we give students to learn vocabulary with and vocabulary skills are very active and generative tasks, that they really have a chance to work with the information, that they're not just sitting there and receiving it as empty vessels, but they have a chance to work with it. And so ways that we can help students to work with this information include discussions, include writing activities, include graphic organizers when they're filling out the information. The key to it is to make sure that there are many right answers, that students know that there's no one way to respond in these tasks. And the research supports that as being a very effective way to teach vocabulary. When we think about why it's important for subject area teachers to provide explicit vocabulary instruction, it often helps to think about the kinds of vocabulary words that are out there. Researchers often distinguish between conversational vocabulary and academic vocabulary. Conversational vocabulary is oral vocabulary. It's the kinds of things that refer to concrete things out there that we discuss on an everyday basis. Academic vocabulary is written vocabulary. It's vocabulary that we learn through schooling, and it's the kind of thing that content area teachers have to teach when they teach their areas, and it tends to be more abstract than conversational vocabulary. Academic vocabulary, really, we can think of as two different kinds as well. There are these words that people have called brick words, and there are words that they've called mortar words. And the brick words are the key concepts in the academic area. So if we were teaching the different kinds of muscles or something like that, there would be skeletal muscles, there would be cardiac muscles, there would be smooth muscles. Those are really the brick vocabulary words when you're thinking about muscles. But there are also these mortar words that you have to know in order to understand the brick words. So if I was talking about muscles, I would need to know words like functions, because those different muscles have different functions. I would need to know the word characteristics, because those muscles have different characteristics. The researchers Isabel Beck and Margaret McCowan have brought all of those notions together when they've talked about word tiers. They talk about 3 different word tiers. And tier 1 are these words that are basic vocabulary words. They're words that occur in oral language, and they tend to be words that most middle school and high school students know the meanings of. They're words like baby and store and bus and car and things like that. And then there are these tier 3 words at the very opposite end. And the tier 3 words are the domain specific words. Those are the ones that content area teachers want to teach. That's their content. They're things like isotope and peninsula and quadratic and those sorts of words. And then in the middle, there are these tier 2 words. And these tier 2 words are academic words, but they cut across the content areas. They're common to all those areas. And they're words like, characteristic and analyze and formulate and things like that. Content area teachers, as I said, teach those tier 3 words. That's their content. But if students don't know these tier 2 words that kind of tie the content together, students are going to have difficulty in understanding the content. So that's why it's so important that content area teachers, as well as English language arts teachers, focus on teaching tier 2 and, if necessary, the tier 1 words, so that students will then be able to understand the tier 3 words. When content area teachers are thinking about the ways in which they can help students understand the words not only that are part of the content, but those vocabulary words that bind together the content, these tier 2 words that help students to understand their content, there's a number of things they can do. Teaching prefixes and suffixes and root words can be a wonderful way for content area teachers to help students. So many of the words in the content area come from Latin and Greek origins, and so it can be especially helpful to teach those within the content areas because that's where those words are occurring. Also, graphic organizers are a terrific way to help students in the content areas to understand, and showing students how the concepts that they're working on relate to concepts that are already familiar to them. There are so many words, we can only teach so many of them. There are so many skills, we can't teach them all, but we can get students engaged with words and meanings and to raise their consciousness about it. I was made particularly aware of this just a few days ago. Some students were in a vocabulary class, and the teacher said, we decided to take the day off and to watch the inauguration of the president. And so the teacher and the students watched the inauguration of President Obama, and the students got increasingly excited as they listened to the inauguration speech. And at the end of it, the teacher said, well, what did you think? And the students said, I can't believe it. They were so excited. President Obama had used 3 of their vocabulary words in the inaugural address. Now, how cool is that?
What I'd like to do, I'm going to stop sharing here and just get any kind of feedback, thoughts, questions that you have about vocabulary at this point. Yes, please, Eric.
So this seriously reminded me of my favorite math instructor from Foothill College and her constant refrain of definition, definition, definition. Because if we did not know the definition of a term, a theorem, it doesn't matter. You don't know how to apply it. You need to understand what that thing is. And then once you have that understanding of it, you can actually apply it in situations that you may not have initially thought of. But until you know that definition, it's just gone.
Yeah, thank you. And that it's a shared definition, that everybody is on the same page with it, right? That there's a clarity in the definition. Not that it has to be exactly the same wording for everybody, but there's a real clarity around what that word means or what that term is. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else have anything to add? Okay, I'm going to go in, and I know, I'm assuming that we're starting out on familiar territory with with vocabulary. And I'm going to go in and show you briefly, because I think that this is probably a little bit, I'm not going to say repetitive, but I would imagine that you know some of this already. I want to go in and show you Marzano's steps for teaching vocabulary. So one way of teaching those words that are essential to your students' understanding of the subject, or your students' understanding of what you want them to do and how you want them to show their learning. All right. So when we're teaching vocabulary, there are 6 steps. Marzano says that, the sort of research shows if we do these 6 steps, really students will have a deep and sort of abiding understanding of the word. So the first step is to explain the word, to provide a student-friendly description, an explanation, an example of this new term. The more you can show a picture, you know, so kind of multimodal too. When we talk about UDL, so different ways to present the word, explain the word, talk about the word, discuss the word, that kind of thing. Not just word with a definition, not old school, look up the words in the dictionary kind of thing. Then have students restate and the definition, the explanation, the example in their own words. So they take the vocabulary word and they put the definition in their own words, demonstrating their understanding of what the word means. Okay. Step 3 is asking students to construct a picture or a symbol or some graphic representation of the term. Those of you who are familiar with Freyer models, and I think most of you are, you should be thinking to yourself now, oh, this is what a Freyer model has you do, okay? Where, you know, you're dividing a piece of paper up into, you know, 4 parts, 4 squares, or maybe more squares with the word in the middle. And on one square they, you know, define the word in their own words. In another square, they draw some graphic representation of the meaning of the word. Another square, they might use the word in context. And then the last square, they might say what the opposite of the word is. Let's say give an antonym, or they might give synonyms of that word. So Freyer models aren't, you know, it's not set up where like it has to be a certain way, but it really is asking students to kind of understand the word in different, you know, kind of from different angles, if you will. Okay. So step 4, Marzano says, is discuss the word, engage students in structured vocabulary discussions that help add to their knowledge of the terms, and, you know, maybe keeping a vocabulary notebook. So you're bringing back that word, you're talking about it in different contexts, let's say, okay? So they get a fuller concept of a fuller idea of the word, and they see it used in different ways. Okay. Not just, again, when you compare this to the old school way that I was taught vocabulary was memorize the definition, you know, write it on a flashcard, word and definition on the back, and memorize it for the vocabulary test that you're going to, you know, get later, or memorize it because it's on the SAT and you're going to have to either know the word, the definition of it, or the, anyway. So this is much more robust all right. And then again, coming back to the word again, periodically asking students to return to their notebooks and discuss and refine entries. So it's not a one and done, is what steps 4, 5, and 6 are going to show you. So then step 6 is allow them to participate in learning games around the vocabulary. And we're going to be looking later at a lot of different options for those learning games, a lot of different ideas. Some of you might have word walls in your classroom. And if you don't, I want to introduce you to those and how to use them. And a word wall is not simply just putting up words on the wall. That's the first step, but then it's around using those words, categorizing the words, playing with those words, creating sentences, and so on. Because students need multiple experiences with a word for it to really sink in, and so that it becomes their own. And when it becomes their own, you will start to see it in their writing. You will start to hear it in their academic conversation. All right. So Marzano tells us that this is the way, you know, following this kind of a format is the way to really make the words stick. right? And I think we know as adult learners, as we come across words we might not know in reading, we've got to um, come across that word several times, multiple times, in order for it to really, sink in, so that when we come across it, we know what it means. Okay. All right. Um, okay, I'm gonna stop sharing because I want to just make sure before I go on to syntax. Do you have any questions about vocabulary instruction? Yes, David.
So it's not really a question. It was just something that I thought was super cool about this, and it was about like a month ago. I was rewatching one of my observations, the recordings that we do,
Mhm.
and I in the recording I was talking about some of our music vocab that we use, and students were responding with it. They were actively participating using it. And when I was watching, it really bugged me that there wasn't anything that showed the vocabulary up on my wall or up on my board. And so over that upcoming week, I decided and I made a designated box on my board that they always have access to, and so that whenever they give feedback on our music playing as a whole class, they know that they are supposed to use as many of those words to give their class feedback. And you know, after this being 2 or 3 weeks now that they've been working on this, they now make it a little bit of a competition to see how many of those vocabulary words they can use correctly in their feedback.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's great. That's exactly what you want. And to have that air of play around it too, and competition, that's perfect, because that keeps them motivated, and it makes it more fun for them. But I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Megan, please.
So my ELD class is my first year teaching ELD. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to lower my hand. There it is. And I did this last year with the regular English 9 classes, but we had list of like Latin and Greek roots to go over. And we had gone through all of them, all like 100 of them. And so we've done all of them, and we did like weekly quizzes and reminders and everything. And then the only other like thing I'm supposed to teach vocabulary wise, or outside of whatever it is we're reading or subject like looking at books, is idioms. And I want to make sure that they remember or can remember the Latin and Greek roots though. So how would I revisit that after break? Because I know we're going to go on break, obviously, but I want to make sure they don't like forget everything.
Right. I think you're going to have to just do, again, create games where they're having to
Yeah.
use them, match them, just something like that. I think, to gamify it. Yeah.
Is it like a pop quiz game?
Pop quiz game, competition, where maybe it doesn't, yeah, where they can be, competing against the teams of each other, and, again, making it fun. But yeah, but not onerous, where they have, a list of 100 and they have to match them up or something like that. Um, yeah, and the idioms, those are great with pictures. The idioms or idiomatic phrases. To draw the graphics that go around with it. A broken heart, things like that. It can be kind of fun. That kids that they will remember. You know. Call it trivia. There, I like that, Erin. You're absolutely right. Like pop quiz right away. Kids are like, ah! Right. Uh-huh.
Words are hard today.
I'm sorry.
I said words are hard today. I spent
Oh,
all day looking at my students' essays and going, "You've written one sentence and we've been working on your final essay where it's 10% of your grade for 2 weeks now. No, it's fine. You're okay." So I just had that conversation a lot today. I'm so tired.
yeah. Oh man. Well, I got to ream a kid today for using Chat GPT on an assignment, and I've been reaching out to some of you in your comments, or my comments to you, with Chat GPT ideas. because I think that it can be used for good for sure. And doing raft prompts and response. David, I sent you one in your that is I put into Chat GPT that you would be a spit valve writing to the trumpet, and so it came back with this great example. So there's ways we can use the obviously technology, and ways that our kids try to use it that's just BS. I don't know. Okay, let me. Any other comments before we leave vocabulary and go into syntax? So, kind of talking about the order of the words, not the words themselves. Oh, I caught it because my kids don't sound like PhD candidates, and it was ridiculous. And I told them, I'm like, what, you think I'm stupid? I said, look, if you're going to use Chat GPT, and I'm not saying, at least tell it to write like an eighth grader. Don't, because it immediately wants to write like it's writing its dissertation, and I can spot that in a hot second.
I have been using it for lesson planning and like prompts and stuff. And I have to specify right at the level of an 11th grade, whatever, and it's still like too advanced compared to like what I get from my students. So
Yeah. So I didn't want to say to them, you need to write like a fourth grade, you need to tell it to write like a fourth grader, but that would be more like the level that I would believe for, my kiddos, than the vocabulary and the syntax that are used. It's hilarious. David, please.
So, one of these I've used, the other one I haven't, but I want to figure out a way to use it. A fun game that you can do for vocabulary words is creating custom words on a game called Scribble, where they have to actually create they have to make a drawing of whatever the word is, and you could do it online. The other one that I want to start using is custom words on a game called Codenames, where you have to find one word that describes multiple things that are on that list. And so it'd be a really cool way to try to get students to think outside of the box when it comes to figuring out what those vocabulary words not just mean, but how you can find those words connecting with others. So one of the things we talked about were like Latin roots, things like that.
That's great. Word play, and get them curious, and get them, again, make it fun and creative. Thank you. All right, Eric, please. You're muted.
Sorry. Building off of what David just said, reminded me of one of the games I played early on this semester with some of my classes of students, which was soup, salad, or sandwich, just to work with the definitions of terms and then having them come up with different evidence to show that a certain thing fits that definition and can be used in such a way. My favorite one, though, was the example, which is, okay, based on all these pieces of evidence I just presented you, tacos or sandwiches, fight me.
That's great.
And then tapping onto what you were talking about earlier by being able to notice when someone is using ChatGPT, I had a student show me something. Hey, can you tell if can tell me if you think this is AI? And I read it, and I'm like, obviously he's using AI, but was able to go, okay, this doesn't sound like you wrote it. Like flat out, this terminology, these tones, does not look like you, this kid who I have talked to on multiple occasions, does not look like you wrote this at all. This looks like someone else. And apparently he's been using an AI detector program to hide his tracks. But it still doesn't sound like him, so.
It's frustrating, I mean, my student population, bless their hearts, they are such poor writers because they just don't. That's why they're in alt ed, right? They have refused to write essays and that kind of thing most of their, since probably elementary school. So, it's easy to bust them. If I was teaching my junior honors class that I taught for many years at Petaluma High, I'd be hard pressed with because some of my students could write. and they were big readers and they had the vocabulary and they had the syntax that that you would find in ChatGPT, I might sort of have a feeling, but I don't know that I'd want to go to the mat with them about it. You know what I mean? Like it. So my heart goes out. You know, like I get that for depending on what you're teaching and the level of kids, that it can be really like a challenge of I feel like this isn't them, but I can't totally prove it. And I would say at this point, and just sort of like teacher little teacher advice to you guys, until you are tenured and whatever, I would just sort of like that would not be the hill I would die on, to be honest with you, because you know there are parents that will fight for their kids, and you just and you don't anyway. I just I would urge you to be careful about that a little bit, unless you can absolutely prove it, or you've never seen anything like this out of this kid, and the kid reads at a fourth grade level, and what is this, or you ask them, what do these words mean, and they give you a blank stare. So yeah. Okay, great. Thank you guys. I love the interaction here and giving resources and ideas and things like that. Thank you. All right, let's talk about syntax. All right. So these are the rules for organizing words or symbols into phrases, clauses, sentences, or visual representation. So it's not just, words, creating sentences. This is also syntax, a squared plus b squared equals c squared kind of a thing. A graph. So one of the main functions of syntax is to organize language in order to convey meaning. Okay, so that's kind of that's our definition to kind of hang our hat on. So it's the way we organize language in order to convey meaning. So again, when we're talking about symbols in math, it's the way you're organizing to convey meaning. And as I said earlier, like subject, verb, object tends to be the basic way that in English we organize our sentences. And I have, again, thinking about that graphic representation of syntax is the order that you're putting the bricks, all right? The pattern that you're making with the bricks. So I went and pulled a bunch of different examples, right? Because you've got bricks and you can make all different kinds of patterns with them, okay? So gives you kind of an example. So syntax is organization, okay? It's organization that conveys meaning. All right. So some examples of language organization are ordinal numbers to sequence events like first, next, last. Rhyming or word patterns for poetry. So there's a pattern or an organization. Okay. Conditional sentences like an if then, or if there are two atoms of hydrogen in H2O, how many oxygen atoms. So you have it sort of, there's a pattern of organization there for conditional sentences. Formulas. Dialogue in a script where you have, character's name and then what they say, and then character's name and what they say. That's organization. Musical notation, like for David, measures, key signature, time signature. Okay. It's the organization of music that conveys meaning. The notes aren't just tossed up on the page, obviously. Diagrams, if you're in PE, let's say if you're phys ed, using symbols, X's and O's, dotted lines and arrows to indicate play positions and movement in sports. Okay, these are all examples sort of across the curriculum of syntax, okay, of using syntax. So I'm going to get a little bit into the weeds and I'm going to do it really fast. Those of you that are kind of language arts teachers, this will make, this is the pool you swim in. People that are not language arts teachers or didn't take, linguistics in college might be a little bit more like, In fact, I was showing Kelly, Kelly Daly and Lindsay, we were going over this slide deck a little bit, and Kelly she was like, what is this, and I said, well, I'll just go through these few slides quickly. So, but why I kept them in, and why I want to show you this just really quickly, is that it goes a ways to explain. Excuse me, I'm going to sneeze in, I think. It goes a ways to explain why our students struggle reading a textbook as our texts get, as we are in high school, right? As they get more sophisticated, as the reading level rises. Excuse me, the syntax demands are more. So what we find are long noun phrases and embedded clauses. We find nominalizations. We find passive voice, and generally longer and more complex sentences. So I want to give you a quick example of like long noun phrases and embedded clauses, okay? So nouns, we all know a noun, person, place, or thing, but a noun that has modifiers, all right? Modifiers like adjectives, articles are like a, and, the, are attached to them. They become noun phrases. So you have an example like cats sleep a lot, okay? No noun phrase. Cats, subject, verb, sleep, right? So here we have the cat, we have an article. So we were getting a noun phrase. Now we're adding some adjectives to it. The fluffy long-haired cat. And you can see the more we get sort of into descriptive writing, as the writing tries to paint a picture, you start getting more complex, all right? You get these noun phrases. The cat on top of the stool is sleeping. So now we have an embedded prepositional phrase where you have, okay? Most big cats, where now we have a determiner and an adjective and so on. Okay, so I came up with this like example where literally if you were to kind of diagram this sentence in this most basic, you would have cat sleeps. That's our subject, that's our verb. But here's the sentence. The fluffy long-haired cat, who once belonged to my neighbor but decided my porch was where she'd rather live, sleeps most of the day on the porch swing. Long sentence. And, and there's a lot of information, a lot of vocabulary in here, a lot of information, but the basic sentence is the cat sleeping, right? So that's one example. Or here's another one, like say for math, and the word problems, often the syntax gets complicated. Write an inequality that, when solved, will give the amount of sales Mandy needs to cover her planned expenses. Okay. And actually, when you break this down, it is a you understood subject, you, verb, write. You write, okay? And then all this other information is embedded in there, right? So, and the further we get away from sort of subject, verb, object, and we add all this, the noun phrases in, you add the adjectives, the modifiers, all of it, it becomes more and more dense for students to kind of get through and figure out what belongs to what, So nominalizations are another example of what happens as syntax becomes more complex. So nominalizations are nouns that are created from adjectives or verbs, okay? And they're often used to describe abstract concepts, which is why we find them in science, we find them in math, we find them in social science as you move up, the grade levels. And of course you find them in language arts, in writers that are really outstanding writers. So an example is like the word interfere. It's a verb, to interfere. There's an actual action there, but interference is the nominalization of it. It becomes the noun. Another decide, to decide, a verb, becomes decision, which is the nominalization. Argue becomes argument. Okay, so I have a little example here, like someone who teaches is a nominalization, teacher. So all right, so you're turning a verb into a noun. So I have this example. One of the reasons why it's done in text and in your textbooks is because you can just see even the difference in, you can put a lot more information by using nominalization into one paragraph. So the first example, when people clear land for houses and roads, they change the environment. They destroy the forest and bushland, and then many animals lose their homes. More houses and roads will pollute the environment even more. And when you kind of notice that also, if you were doing your subjects and verbs, they're close together. Now we're looking at nominalization. Clearing and development of land often results in the destruction of the natural habitat of many local species. It may also increase the level of pollution. Okay, we've said the same thing, but we've said it more concisely, but we've done it through nominalization, and kids can struggle with this. Okay. All right. And then lastly, passive voice, right? And basically with passive voice, what's happening is that instead of the subject doing something, an active verb, the subject is being acted upon, okay? And often we don't know by whom. We know something was happening to the subject, but we don't know who did it, okay? So it'll be like, I ate the cookie. That's just a subject, verb, object. I, subject, ate, verb, cookie is the direct object, right? But if I say the cookie was eaten, cookie is the subject, was eaten is the verb, and we don't know who ate it. The cookie was eaten. They talk a lot like it passive voice in politics, because you don't want to, we don't know who did it. The blame is not being made. So the Statue of Liberty was constructed from an iron framework attached to steel beams. So that's an example. And then the changes in the plant size were measured each day. Who measured them? I don't know. We don't know. You don't know who did it. So thus it's passive. The subject is passive. It's being acted upon by, you could say who did it. The changes in the plant size were measured each day by the students. But you'll notice that by the students is a prepositional phrase. Who does it gets buried into a prepositional phrase. I love this. I'll just let you guys read this little Calvin and Hobbes. It cracks me up, this little cartoon. This last one sounds like it's Chat GPT, assignment, or like something it generated. All right. So I know, I hope I didn't go into too many weeds there. What I'd like to offer you, and you don't have to do this, but I did ask if you have an example of your, if you could have brought your textbook and have it nearby. I mentioned that last class, or something that you're going to be working with your students, some text. I would love for you to give an example in this. You have, I'll put this in the chat too. You have access to this, and you have editing access. I would love for you to put in a sample from your text of something that is, a challenging syntax, where it could be a word problem, or it could be, where it's a long juicy sentence. We in EL, we'll call them big, long juicy sentences, or juicy sentences, where we go in there and we kind of tease it apart and figure out where's the verb and the subject, and and what is actually going on, and these modifiers, what are they actually modifying, these adjectives and adverbs and things like that. So I'm going to kind of do a couple things here. If we look at our next slide, we're taking a break. So it is right now 6:09. So I'm going to go 6:10, 6:20. Let's go. I want to give you a good break because we need it. Let's go to 6:25. Within the 5 minutes, if you feel so moved to add to that document, that would be great. So take 10 minutes to totally brain break, 5 minutes if you feel like it to throw something onto that document, just so we have some examples to take a look at potentially. But I'm going to stop sharing and I'll put that in the chat that we'll be back at 6:25. Do you have any questions for me at this point, though? Okay.
So I have another question on challenging syntax. I'm running into a problem with my students who are every single class is in the whole school, everyone's doing poetry out loud in January, and they all have to choose different poems. And they are coming across poetry terms, which is not necessarily my favorite thing, but words that even I never heard of. And I'm just like, I'm not sure. Google it. Like, so I don't, how would I, like, other than Google it or look up a dictionary, is there another way I can help some of this? My juniors have to have 20-line poems. My freshmen have to have 10-line poems. So it's more the juniors are running into the longer, more complicated poems.
Yeah. I think a couple things come to mind. First of all, is to try just just to tell them to first look at the context and see if they can potentially figure the word out, or at least make an educated guess, infer the meaning from the context. But I will say that, poetry can be, as you know, very dense and purposely kind of obscure, where you really have to work at it to figure it out. So that might not help. They might have to just, look up the word, and it might be being used in a little different way, because some of the words are
Yeah.
ancient.
I did explain one of the words that I hadn't heard of. I was like gloaming. What is gloaming? And it's just another like older archaic word for twilight. And I was like, the only reason they use this word is because if you look up two lines, they said roaming. They just wanted to rhyme. So we're running into some issues like that. But I was just like, some of these are a little rough.
Yes. Well, and again, if they're depending on the age of the poet and the poem, that
Yeah.
could be just language that was used. Yeah, one of the poets that I love, I don't that kids enjoy and is writes longer poems is Billy Collins.
Billy Collins.
Are you familiar with him?
No.
Oh, he was our poet laureate. Excuse me, I'm gonna keep coughing. Several years ago, several decades ago, I should say. He's hilarious. He wrote a poem about reading poetry where he compares it to, you know, um, water skiing. He wrote a poem about why I don't keep. It's called "Why I Don't Keep a Gun in My House." It's about his neighbor's dog barking and barking, and they're funny. Oh, another one that I love is called "On Turning 10." So they're very accessible. They're simple but deep. Yeah.
I just looked them up. So my students are only allowed to choose a poem um off the Poetry Out Loud website.
Oh,
So they do have two Billy Collins. They have Snow Day
okay.
and Today. Those are the only two that they have. But I mean, they're finding there's some like Elizabeth Acevedo ones that are really good, like Ode to the Head Nod, which is pretty fun. And some of them, like there's another one called Discrimination, which is like talking about, it's like, well, I wouldn't let my sister marry one, those human beings, and like it's a whole thing of like discrimination, but towards all humans. So there's some interesting ones, but there's so much like Charlotte Bronte or Walt Whitman or so I was like they keep stumbling across some of the more difficult ones. So but I mean they only have to we're not going in deep, and because they all have separate poems, like we're gonna do some poem annotation together, but it's more just that they have their own poem and they're supposed to be annotating and memorizing it on their own. So they need to do all those same steps by themselves, Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. I'm gonna go get something to eat real quick.
All right.
All right. So I wanted to just clear up before, I didn't want to ask when everyone else was here because it's just like personal to my own case. So I don't have to do any of this. I know with meeting with my mentor and my practicum supervisor that this doesn't come up on my lesson plans. But however, I know I was looking further into your slides and it's talking about how we're gonna use this in our final project. Um, so I guess my thing to you is, well, I guess part two, the analysis of student language use. I guess I just don't do that part in my lesson plan, correct?
Right. So here's the thing, Isaiah, full disclosure. Okay, so let me back away for a second and just give you what I've done in the past. I have always had at least one world language person in my class, and most of them have been like you, where they're teaching at least one upper level class, where they're basically teaching language arts, but in a different language. Excuse me.
Yeah.
I don't know why I got something down in my throat. Anyway, okay. So potentially you could approach this, and what they have done is just done the assignment using the general ed lesson plan, but using their AP class or their heritage speaker class, and they're reading, Don Quixote, and the students are going to write a descriptive paragraph, or they're going to compare and contrast or whatever, right? So, and they're
Okay.
writing in Spanish and they are reading in Spanish, but basically they're teaching a language arts lesson. So
Yeah.
they could identify, you could identify the language function, which is going to be described. You could do vocabulary that they would need to be using. It would be obviously in Spanish, but they might be using ordinal numbers first, second, third, as they write, whatever. So that's one option. The other option, to be perfectly honest with you, and I think what your field supervisor would appreciate you do, is trash the whole thing. Like, he doesn't have to do any of this. So I literally, and I haven't heard back from Kelly, but Lindsay was going to reach out because we were talking about you yesterday. Lindsay and I were, that potentially you're excused from the whole bloody thing. Like, you don't have to do any of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to just go with the flow on that. I'm going to let you, because I'll just put in, it's a 300 point assignment, that none of it really relates to your, other than what I could do is there is in part one of the project is a lesson plan, right? So you could do the lesson plan. You could do a lesson plan, and yours doesn't have language function or any of that. So none of the rest of the pieces would match up, and I would just excuse the rest of it. So it won't count against you won't count against you at all.
Yeah.
So that's one way of doing it. Or you could just approach it like, I'm going to teach this text and I want my students writing, a path somehow I want them writing in Spanish, and they're using the language. They are of a proficiency to be able to use the language in the same way that a native English speaker is using the language to communicate understanding of, To Kill a Mockingbird.
Uh-huh. Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, let me know what you prefer. I mean, I would normally accept a challenge, but I already do have like a lot of stuff on my plate as it is. So if I don't have to do it, then I'm gonna choose not to do it.
Right. Totally. You have that option as far as I understand. I will let you know that isn't the case. There's going to be, when we get through the slides a little further in, we're going to do like a breakout where I'm going to send people to their breakout rooms to kind of look at some of the resources that I've curated for them.
Okay.
I have put in yours. I created a folder for you, and I put in the EdTPA handbook for world language. So, I guess take the time that you're not using for this class to kind of take a look at what you're going to need to do for your
Okay.
EdTPA, you know?
Okay. That sounds good. And then we have our
Looking at
homework.
Aaron. No, Aaron, it isn't the same.
Come
Because
on.
please,
So we have this week's formative assessment number 5. The reason I think I'm gonna log off of here.
Huh?
Yeah. So I have to do this formative assessment number 5, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
And
perfect.
you're not going to have to do the assignment for this week 6, because that's taking them through basically the process of identifying a language function, a language, the language demands, all of that. So you don't have to do that one either.
Okay. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And
Who is Mary Beth? Is that the name of your
Mary Jo.
Mary Jo? Because
Yeah.
she's actually advocating for the fact that her world language people potentially won't have to take this class at all. So
okay.
there's sort of that is in the mix down the road. But yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, I just had some stuff pop up at home. We got some brown water running out of our faucets and stuff. So
Oh, great. Okay.
I'm gonna have to go run and grab some drinking water and stuff like that, make sure everything's okay. So is it okay if I get out of here? I know you said that I could stay or I could go.
Yes, you can stay or you can go. And I will be in touch with you. But I will see you back for sure for session 7. Okay. Which is January. I don't know what it is.
So, well, it says, oh, this is week 5, right? So week 6 is January 6th. And I don't have to come to that one.
Nobody's coming to that one. That one's just on your own. They're working on an assignment for week 6 that you don't need to do.
Okay. Okay, cool.
Week 7.
So I'll see you week 7 then. Perfect.
All right.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Take
All
care.
right.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good evening.
Okay. Welcome back. I paused the recording for a little bit and now I'm back up recording again. I was just putzing around with breakout rooms because we're going to get into groups in a little bit, but I goofed and anyway, I'll figure it out. So let's go let me share my screen again because we're going to go now into the last language demand. There are 4, right? Language function, vocabulary, syntax, and now we're going to talk about discourse. So this is how the members of the discipline write, talk, how they participate in knowledge construction using the structures of written and oral language. Okay. So discipline-specific discourse has distinctive features of ways of structuring oral and written language. We call them text structures, and I will show you an example in just a bit. Okay, or we are representing knowledge visually, like a proof, like a 2-column proof is a discourse for those of you in math. And remember I mentioned, so we've got the bricks, which are which are the words. The syntax is the pattern we're laying the bricks. And the discourse is what we're making with the bricks, the structure, okay? And again, I've got a lot of brick structures here, all look very different, but they're all made of bricks, right? In different patterns and whatnot. All right. So some examples of how members of the discipline talk, write, and participate in knowledge construction. So again, for science or math, could be interpreting graphic representations. So this interpretation can be either done through writing, where they're, they write their interpretation, or it could be oral. But regardless, the discourse is what we call output. This discourse is how, and when I say discourse, don't think I mean, and I know sort of it's often discourse means talking with each other. Academic discourse means talking to each other. It also means writing. It means output of some sort. So oral output or written output, okay? And it's the way, this discourse is the way that we get to know if our students know what they're up to, if they know what they're doing, have they learned something? It's through that output. All right, another, if I had an art teacher, let's say developing critiques of works of art, the critique often is a, written critique. Summarizing informative texts is another kind of discourse. Completing lab report. Okay, the lab report is a form of discourse, a form of output. Essays that, English teachers are very familiar with, and social scientists and so on. Writing narrative text, so writing stories. Multimedia presentations, all right? So the output can be visual as well as, and I tend to forget that piece, even though I teach a film as literature class, kind of funny. I forget to put that visual piece, but you can be communicating ideas through visuals, right? That is output as well, okay? And then debates is another, another kind of output, its own kind of structure, right? You talk, then I talk, then you talk, then I talk. So a debate has a particular format, and but it's output. Okay. So to kind of make things a little simpler and to be thinking about, okay, well, if I was going to have my students, what kind of discourse am I going to have? What kind of output am I going to have? Marzano has these 7 text organizational patterns, and I'm going to click on this so we see it in a bigger way. And this is in your support materials. These are discourse. These are structures. There is, sequence, compare, contrast, concept definition, description, episode, generalization, principle, process, cause, effect. And what I like about this particular chart is it gives you signal words that you might read if you were reading, again, we talked about this. It's this similar to this is in that toolkit I shared earlier in the evening, right? So in your toolkit, there were signal words for the particular sort of language functions, okay? So concept, definition, description. So when we think about language function versus the discourse, a description might be a descriptive paragraph that the student's going to write. They're going to write a description of what happened in the lab when they observed something. They're writing a description, okay? The language function, that verb would be to describe, right? They're going to use the language to describe, language function. What is the discourse? What's the output going to be? A description, maybe done through a lab report, because the lab report is going to include description, okay? So these organizational patterns, Marzano calls them, are text structures. Again, remember the structure, all right? These are things that our students do. These are output that they do with language, okay? All right, let me get back in here. All right, now, I'm gonna put you into breakout rooms. Let me go into, you have the support documents. I wanna show you while I'm sharing my screen, what I've put together for you. Now, I understand that, for some of you, this is kind of new. We're talking about things that you haven't necessarily learned as a subject area student. So if you've been a math major, for instance, and you studied math, you weren't probably talking about language functions and discourse and that kind of thing. Okay. So this might be new for you, and thinking about teaching your students, it's a kind of a new way of framing it, or a different lens through which to look. But just remember that you're talking about using language to show what you know, okay? Using language to learn and using language to show what you've learned. So I've created I've created these folders for you, and I've put things in the folder. All right. So let's take math, for instance, because there's quite a few of you in math. You'll see that I put quite a bit of things in here for you, particularly because I think for you guys, this is a little new territory. At least the candidates I've had in the years past have been a little bit more like, what are we talking about here? Now, a couple things I want to call out to you. And it's not just, so I'm not just talking with math teachers, actually, because you'll find in your folder, you'll have some of these same things, but it'll be in your particular subject area. I first want to alert you to the EdTPA glossary that I put into your folder. Okay. And I put it into science folder. I put it in, I believe, into social science folder. So this math gloss, I want you to particularly pay attention to right here, the 4 language demands. Read what it says about academic language, and read the 4 language demands, the way they are defining it. Pay particular attention to the language functions, and notice, math people, it says examples of mathematical functions that are not language functions include solve problems, simplify the expressions, calculate the answers, and estimate the answers. So solve, simplify, calculate, and estimate are not language functions. So when you're writing your lesson plan and it says identify your language function, these words should not be part of that function. The words up here, it might be describe, compare, or record, or justify, or summarize, or you've got plenty of words to choose from. If it were me and I wanted to play it real safe, because I would, when I'm doing my EdTPA, I would choose one of these words right here in bold, and that's what I would create my lesson plan focusing on as my language function. Okay. I would use one of those: describing, predicting, comparing, and so on. And then read over what they say about vocabulary and discourse. So that's one document. Also, I put in the Common Core standards for you. I put in, this is straight out of the EdTPA too. So you may have this handbook. I don't know if they've given this to you yet, but you now have access to it because I gave you part of it. This is understanding the academic language in the EdTPA. Okay, so you can read through that, and it gives you examples of how, that's math specific. So I think that's really helpful for math people to kind of wrap their head around. Anyway, so I want you to click into each of these and just check it out and see what it is. Let me go back to science. I have quite a few things I've loaded in here for you in science. I've even got, David, I got performing arts. And what I did is I loaded the entire Ed TPA assessment handbook for performing arts in there. Okay. So you can take a look, excuse me, at what your Ed TPA handbook says, and so on. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing and just see if that all makes sense, because what I want to do is put you into a breakout room. If you have like people. So for instance, Max, I was going to have you in your own breakout room. Rob and Elena, I was going to put you guys together as social science. Does that make sense, Elena? Is that okay? Okay. Then English, I was going to do Lennon, Sabrina, Cassie, Megan, and Sarah. Is Sarah still, did Sarah, she had talked about needing to go, so she's not here. Okay. And then math will be Saul, Aaron, Savannah, who's not here. Savannah's not here, is she? Eric, and Matthew's not here either, huh? Whoa. Good thing I'm recording this one, because this is not a good one to miss. All right. And then David, I was going to put you by yourself too. And then I'm going to pop into the rooms as you guys are in there and just kind of see where you're at, take a look. I had originally thought like 20 minutes for this, just so you can kind of familiarize yourself with what's in your folder. It doesn't mean you have to do anything with it, but I do want you to just see what I've kind of curated for you and put together for you. Okay. So questions? No? Okay. First, I'm going to pause the recording because this part nobody needs to see. All right. All right. So we're recording again, and I want to now go and talk about the final project, okay? And hopefully make this clear, so that it just kind of makes sense. All right, so let me share my screen. Okay. And let me do this slideshow. Okay. So the final project. There are 3 and a quarter parts to it. There's part 1, which is the lesson plan. And as part of the lesson plan, you have what I'm calling part 1A, the course to fieldwork assignment. And we'll go into that in some depth. Part 2 is the analysis of students' language use after you teach the lesson that you wrote in part 1. And then part 3 is the commentary piece, where you're reflecting on the lesson after you teach. Okay. So let me click on the final project. Let's take a look at it. And I'm also, just to make sure that everybody has it handy, I am going to put it in the chat. Where are we? All right, so there is the document we're looking at right here. Okay, so this is what we just looked at. There are 3 parts to the project. Lesson plan with a fieldwork, coursework, fieldwork assignment, part 2 and part 3. All right, so let's talk about part 1, the lesson plan. It is due on Sunday, January 12th. It is worth 100 points. And you're going to use the Be a Teacher lesson plan. You all are Gen Ed, so I've actually linked that lesson template here, but it's one you've used before, I believe. So you're going to develop a lesson plan that engages your students in your classroom in a learning task related to a specific content area standard and objective. Because just like, let's just open this up so we see, here's our lesson plan template. Remember, the first thing that you do in your lesson plan after you fill at the top is you identify a California content standard and you put that there, right? Then you are to identify an ELD standard that connects to your California content standard. And if you're not sure how to do that, we can talk about that. I will teach that to you much more specifically in our 252 class. I teach, you guys will be with me for the EL strategies, but this ELD strategy should connect in with that content standard. Then I guess this is optional. If it makes sense, if it doesn't make sense for this lesson, then skip the interdisciplinary standard. Here you have your primary learning objective. Okay, this is what you want students to basically know and be able to do. Here's your essential question related to that. And then here's where you're really being clear. Students will know, students will be able to, right? You're filling in 2 of these know, and 2 of these will be able to. And then you do the assessment section. And here's where we get into the meat of what, you hopefully, and kind of, I'm looking at your faces a little bit. Have you guys done a lesson plan before yet? You have. Okay. So this is good. Okay. This is where I'm really like, we're kind of focused in this class right here. This, even though it looks small, it's kind of a big deal, because this is where you're identifying your language function, and they want you to bold and underline the verb, that language function, the analyze, the describe, the evaluate, the whatever. Then what is the support you're using for your language function? Remember, again, you can go back to the toolbox, toolkit I gave you, or on your EdTPA booklet. It talks about supports for language function. You're going to identify vocabulary, no more than 3 words, no more than 10 words, no fewer than 3. What vocabulary support are you going to give? Minimum of 2. Might be having them do a Freire model, and it might be having them do a vocabulary game. And then you're going to pick syntax or discourse. You don't have to have both. It's an or. It says and, but it's an or, and or. And most of my candidates do an or. They pick syntax or they do discourse. Remember, discourse is connected very closely to the output, what you're going to have students do, how you're going to have them show what they know. They're going to write a lab report. They're going to write a paragraph. They're going to do a 2-column proof. So a discourse is usually the one that people choose. All right. And then the rest of this, this checklist is whatever. But so then, okay, so let's go back to our project. So you're going to do a lesson plan. Now you are going to submit your lesson plan both to this class 242, and you'll see that it's in Canvas for you to submit your lesson plan, and into curriculum 282 to your practicum, fieldwork, and supervision Canvas course. There's a place in there for you to submit that. Okay. And it needs to be in by Sunday the 12th. All right. And okay, so this is just kind of going over, ignore the world language because Isaiah has pieced out. So this is just kind of going over what I just did, that with the language plan template, you need to include at least 2 supports for the language function, 2 supports for vocab, and 2 supports for either syntax or discourse. Okay. And then this is the sort of the rubric that's used to assess the lesson plan. And I'm going to tell you, I look at it for 1/2 second, but what I'm looking at, and I'll tell you what I'm looking at in your lesson is that there is connection. So what do I mean? I mean that I want to make sure that the standard that you have identified is being supported by what your lesson is, that your assessment is assessing that standard in some way, that your language function that you've chosen is again connected to what students will know and be able to do, that there's linkage, that there, if that makes sense, that you can just sort of see this thread that flows through it. Elena, please.
Yeah, I was just wondering, with this lesson plan, is this any, are we gonna have to record this one at all? Us teaching this lesson plan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sort of, yes. And we'll get to that part when we get to the coursework to fieldwork thing.
Okay.
Okay, because that's where this part comes in. All right. So any questions about the lesson plan at this point? Yes, David, please.
So if level 3 vocabulary is constantly being integrated into the classroom, do the vocabulary words need to be new?
No, they don't need to be new. And they don't even necessarily need to be a tier 3 word. They could be tier 2 words. And in fact, when you talk about language function, and let's say we talk about the word describe, let's say the students are going to describe the effect of putting a drop of oil into water. They're going to describe that. You might, as one of your vocabulary words, might be the word describe. What does that mean to describe something? What does the word describe mean? So that could be one of your vocab words. Okay. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a tier 3. It doesn't matter. Just choose a few words that again make sense in your lesson and in that sort of progression from standard to your learning objective to your, because those are all connected to what you're going to assess. Okay. So let's get into the coursework to fieldwork piece. This is due, and I'll tell you what this is in just a second. This coursework to fieldwork piece is due January 19th, Sunday, January 19th. I'm not giving you any points for this. It is a requirement for Curriculum 282. In fact, I won't even be seeing this, okay? This right here, this part 1A is not me. This is the coursework to fieldwork piece, and your field supervisor is involved with this. But what let's look over this, and this is a link that will take you to the description of this part 1A. So this is for observation 1. Will show evidence of students' understanding and or use of the targeted academic language function and other language demands, vocab, syntax, and or discourse. Okay, so let me put this into like layman's terms. In your lesson plan, you have identified what the language function is. Students are going to describe, let's say, and you're going to teach the vocabulary word describe, and you're going to teach the vocabulary word tincture, and you're going to teach the vocabulary word something else. And you are also going to talk to your students, or you're going to teach your students, you're going to choose discourse because you're going to teach them how to write a descriptive paragraph for a lab report. Okay. So what is going to happen with your coursework to fieldwork is somebody needs to see that. Okay. You're going to record yourself teaching your students about the word description, let's say, having your students writing a descriptive paragraph, that sort of thing. So let me get into this and have you take a look. Okay. So what this says is the evidence that you've completed your coursework to fieldwork. The first one is the lesson plan. I think we're all cool on that. We know the lesson plan. You're giving it to me. You're putting it into your fieldwork class. Now, here's the observable evidence piece. You have 3 options in how you want to do this. All right. How you want to provide evidence. All right. The first option is one 20-minute video, where in that 20-minute video, you are providing evidence of students understanding and use. Now, let me say this about understanding. They might not understand it. It might be a disaster. That's okay. Okay? That's okay. We're not saying they have to understand it and have to have a full command of it. Okay? But what we need to see, what your field supervisor wants to see in this video is that you are, that they can see that your students are using the language function. They're describing, right? They are using vocabulary, the vocabulary that you, or at least one of the words that you identified in your lesson plan. And they have evidence of the, let's say, the example, to keep with the example I'm giving you, the discourse. You're talking about how to describe for a lab report, okay? So 20 minutes video that you upload into that class. I'm forgetting the name of the class again, 282, that you have, you upload into 282, and you will also complete this part. So you've uploaded your 20-minute video, and then you're going to answer the following 3 prompts, okay? You see how there's, this is the way Lindsay set this up. See how there's this bracket here? I don't have access to it. I can't show you because my cursor won't go in it. But it's in your Canvas course for 282, so you will have access. You're going to make a copy of it, is how she's set it up for you. And then she's set it up just like the EdTPA has, where these brackets, you put your cursor in there and you start typing and the brackets start moving apart. So you're able to type inside the bracket, okay? So the 3 prompts that you're going to address for your 20-minute video is to explain and provide one concrete example for the extent to which your students were able to use or struggled to use the language function. And then she's given you some sentence frames. So you'd say like student name. So let's say, you know, Joe Smith used description when they, whatever it is, when they turned to their neighbor and asked them, what did you see? What I saw happen when I put the oil on the water was, and so you can use a quote from the video. So you're going specifically into what your field supervisor can see in the video, okay? And then same with the vocabulary and same with the syntax, okay? So you're not doing any markers in Go React, but your video is uploaded, it's connected into the Go React, okay? Questions on this so far? David.
So I just want to make sure that I'm clear on the directions when it comes to what they're looking for. Can it be just through oral communication? Or does it have to be written?
Yes, it can be through oral communication in this case. Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, good question. So then when we get back, so option 1 is a 20-minute video. Okay, that's it. Option 2 is 2 10-minute videos. All right. But again, with the 2 10-minute videos, you're going to upload them into your Canvas course, and you're going to do the same language commentary, but you might be saying in the first video, so you don't need to do one of these for each of the videos, but you're going to be talking about in which video you're relating this to. Does that make sense? So option 2 is 2 10-minute videos. Option 3, because we want to give you lots of options, UDLE. Option 3 is 1 10-minute video and 1 student work sample. Okay, so this one you only need 1 10-minute video, but you need a student work sample. So maybe your student work sample is the lab report they wrote. Okay. Maybe the student work sample is a Freyer model of the word describe, and they've, shown their understanding of the word. Okay. So you decide what this is going to be. Are you going to do one 20-minute video? Are you going to do two 10-minute ones? Or are you going to do one 10-minute video and a work sample? And actually, right before I told you, before we got on the Zoom tonight, I was talking with Lindsay. She wanted to clarify that you actually could have more than one work sample if you wanted to, but just be clear when you're doing your commentary, your academic language commentary, which work sample you're talking about if you've loaded more than, one work sample in there. And also be clear that you're talking about, let's say you're talking about the concrete example for vocabulary, you're talking about the Freyer model work sample, for instance. You're being really specific with your field supervisor what you're referring to. Are you referring to the video? Are you referring to the work sample? Or if you've had two videos, which video are you referring to? Okay. So that is the, that's the part 1A, your coursework to field work. Okay, so let's go back here. So now we've gone through the lesson plan, we get it. Coursework to field work, I don't give it any points. I don't even look at it. Your field supervisor, that's all them. Now, part 2 of this project is after you have taught the lesson. And this is not due until February 10th. Okay. And we're getting, to the end of the course here. February 10th, it's worth 100 points. After you complete teaching the lesson, you're going to do an analysis of students' language use. Okay, why am I having you do this? Because the Ed TPA has you do this. Remember I said, this is, I'm taking you through a dress rehearsal of the Ed TPA, okay? So they're gonna ask for work samples. So this is the document that you're gonna fill out. So as part of your, you teach the lesson, you're gonna collect evidence of student work from the whole class related to the learning task, okay? The learning task is going to be, that the learning task, again, to use the example that I've been using, the learning task is the descriptive paragraph in the lab report. That's the learning task, okay? So for this part, you're going to collect all of your student lab reports, and you're going to select 3 work samples, like 3 lab reports that represent patterns of learning. And this is all kind of academic ease. Basically, what you're going to do is you're going to pick one from a kid who just knocked it out of the park. This kid totally knew how to describe in a way that a scientist describes. Next one, this kid had some challenges in describing. They might use the same word over and over. This kid struggled completely, didn't describe it at all, summarized what happened. First we dropped the oil in the water, and then we dumped out the water into the sink. Like there was no description. Now, what I would like you to do, if you can, is that one of your 3 focus students, one of these 3 work samples, was done by an English language learner. All right. Why am I doing that? Because the Ed TPA does that. Okay. That's not something I'm making up. That's them. They want one of the students to be an EL. If you don't have an EL learner, then a student who you feel is challenged by academic English. It's difficult for them. They're not strong writers, or they're not strong readers, kind of a thing. All right. So you're going to analyze these work samples to identify specific ways that the students succeeded or the students struggled with using the language demands. Okay. And so you're going to, let's go into the document here. Yes, David.
So I'm wondering if, and I don't know if I'm going to phrase this correctly. Can the samples be recordings of performance of how the students are working on the, like, as an example for me, they do recorders or xylophones. Could I have a recording of like the particular students that I'm trying to have do it in as a video? Because the work that they're going to produce is not going to be on paper. It's going to be on what they've been practicing to perform.
Ooh, that's a good question. And you and me will have to do something different I mean, it sounds reasonable to me. I don't know. Okay, let me put it this way. On the EdTPA, and I will check with Kelly to make sure that I'm really right on this, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. They want paper. They want student work, right? There's time for video. They want to see student whatever, but they want student work. They want some writing, something on paper that you're going to send into them. I will double check. But if there's some way that you could get them, if you're thinking about a way that they're showing your language function, is there a way that they can do this in some sort of written format? And I know they're littles too.
I can make it happen. It's just it strays away from our normal lesson plan is what it would be going towards,
Right.
because I have a certain function towards getting towards our performances that we go towards. So I'm trying to see how I can implement these things into the current lessons that I'm teaching.
100%. I get it. I get it. And I think part of this, and again, I'm going to check with Kelly on this because I want to be totally clear on this, but part of the reason why I'm doing this is so that you guys start thinking about when it's not the dress rehearsal anymore, when it's the actual show, you've kind of thought about what you will use and how you'll set things up for yourself so that it's smooth, you know? So if you're doing a dress rehearsal this year, next year's the show. And you can make some tweaks and things like that so that next year you kind of have it in the bag. You know how to, you know what lesson you're going to do and what you're going to have students write and all that kind of stuff. And you will have had your field supervisor be able to look at it and coach you through it as you're working on this, and me as well, being able to kind of coach you through it. And what I can't do or I'm unsure of, I will absolutely check with the powers that be so that I can make sure that I'm giving you guys the proper guidance and information. Okay. So when you're filling out this section, and we will talk about this, I'm going to go over this fairly quickly now because this isn't due till till February 10th, and we've got time to talk about this, right? And I know you guys are tired, as so am I. But your target language use is, let's say, the function they're going to describe, all right? So student one, and then they're using certain vocabulary to describe, and they're doing a lab report, right? So you're going to write in the function is to describe. They're going to use the word I see, I noticed, I observed, what maybe some vocabulary words around that. And then discourse is the lab report. So what success did you see with student one? What struggle in function? What success, what struggle? Maybe there was none. There might not be any struggle. You could say none there, okay? But so you fill this out. That's it. That's the analysis of student language use. And then part 3, the commentary, again, due Monday, February 10th. After teaching the lesson and analyzing the students' use of language, complete the integrating academic language into a content area lesson plan commentary. I know, it's so wordy. Oh my God. Okay. So this is where you're identifying, like, here was the language function support I used. Here's the vocab support I used. Here's the discourse support I used. And then you're just answering these questions. What supports were effective and guided students' successful understanding and use of academic language? what supports were not or less effective in guiding students' understanding. Okay. So you're just answering these questions, all right? Like, based on your analysis of student learning presented in the analysis of student language use, that other document, describe next steps for instruction. Like, for the whole class, what might you do? And then for the 3 focus students, what might you do? Okay. Again, why am I doing this? Because they have you do it on the EdTPA. That's all. So as bulky and like onerous as this is, we're giving you a peek into it. Okay, let's get back here. So that's that. There's 3 parts. Commentaries worth 100 points. The analysis of the language use 100 points. Lesson plans 100 points. All right. I'm going to stop share so that I can see you and see if there's any questions that you have at this point. Because again, we have time, we have time to talk, you have time to reach out to me and get extra help too. All right, let me get back into share and then let's finish this up here. I think, is that where I'm at? Let me get here. Okay. And okay, let's talk about week 6. The way I have it set up is just so that you have time to work on this part of the assignment. I'm going to walk you through it and explain to you why this I think is helpful. Okay, so next week's an independent class, although as I said at the outset of this class, I will open up a Zoom on Monday, January 6th. I will open up a Zoom from 5 until 5:20. If you show up between 5 and 5:20, I'm all yours and we'll spend as long as we need to together. If nobody shows up between 5 and 5:20, I'm closing the Zoom and we're done. Okay. That doesn't mean you can't reach out to me and say, oh, I wasn't back in town yet and I do need to talk with you. That's fine. But I will just sort of open it up just in case. All right. So it's an independent class. Whoops, shoot. Okay. Let me get back into here because I want to just do this. All right. So this assignment will be due in Canvas by January 12th. Okay. So what the assignment is called Justifying Language Demands and Supports for a Learning Task. All right. Again, why we're doing this is because this is what EdTPA is going to have you do. This also is worth 100 points. It is a good preliminary to the capstone project that we're doing. So if you follow these directions, I think you'll be fine. It basically takes you through the lesson plan and makes sure that what you're choosing to do is connected and makes sense. So the first thing is you're identifying a content standard, right? And you're kind of thinking about, okay, are you going to be using a textbook, informational text, or novel that might be used when teaching the standard, okay? Using the content area standard, write 1 or 2 learning objectives and develop a learning task. This is all should be familiar, like, oh yeah, this is what you're doing on your lesson plan. All right. So you're going to write your standard here, and you literally could, once you do this assignment, you can just cut and paste right off of here and throw it in your lesson plan. Okay. This is kind of like an outline, the way, English teachers might make students do an outline before they actually write the essay. This is an outline of your lesson plan in a way. So you're going to list your standard. You're going to list your objective or objectives here, your key learning task. Okay, again, that task is the output. This is what are you going to have your students do? That's the task. What are they going to do so that you'll know that they met the objective, that you know that they learned something? All right. So that part's pretty easy, I think. This all isn't hard. Okay, then part B is you're going to identify the language demand. So based on what I want my students to do, I want them to write a lab report. Okay. But I realize that the language demand for them to write a lab report is to be able to describe. Okay. So my language demand is going to be the language function is going to be to describe, and I want them also to write it in a lab report. So we're going to do discourse, and vocabulary that I'm going to do is I want them to know the word describe, I want them to know the word observe, and I want them to know the word, I don't know, whatever, that also kind of works into that thing. So what this sort of does is take you through a thinking process of, all right, how will my students use the reading or the writing or listening and speaking during this learning task? Okay, so my students might be reading a sample lab report. They might be writing a sample observation using a sentence frame. They might be speaking with a partner explaining something that they're observing. All right. And they're listening to me lecture about a lab report. All right. What text will they use in this task? Maybe they're not going to use any text, or maybe they will be using a lab report as an that you wrote to show as an example. What kind of talk will be part of the task? Or are they going to be are they going to be like listening to you, teacher talk? Are they going to be speaking to a partner, talking about what they're observing? Okay. Then based on all of this, what is the language function? And I'm kind of giving it to you already. Like the way this example that I'm kind of taking through each step is they're going to be describing. Okay. And then the function supports. What supports am I going to give them to help them with that function? I might give them I might give them a graphic organizer. I might give them a sentence frame. I might have them do a pair share about what they're observing, where they practice observing something and describing it to a friend, and the friend has to draw it so that they, a partner rather than, and they, you know, so that they get practice with describing something in a clear way. Those are all function supports. Discourse demands. So this is going to be like writing the lab report. What are they going to need? What are the demands of that? And what are the supports you're going to give to help with that lab report? Okay. And you don't need to do syntax because you're doing discourse. Remember, it's one or the other. And then vocabulary. What are the vocabulary demands? And you don't have to have all three tiers. This says you do, but you don't in the EdTPA. So just if they're all tier 2 words, just list them there. They don't have to be 1, 2, and 3. But what vocab supports are you going to give? Are you going to have to do a Frere model? Are you going to have them, you know, whatever? All right. And then, and this absolutely EdTPA, you have to justify why you identified the language function and demands that you identified, and why, and you know, and why did you choose the supports that you did? Like justify that, right? And then what do you know about your students and their learning task that helps you justify your specific choices? So you know, for instance, that a lot of your students are second language learners, and that they are not familiar with the word observation or observe. It's not something they are familiar with the word of look or see, but observation. So I had to talk. So that's kind of what you would talk about. What do you know about your students that made you, you know, make the choices that you made? Okay. I know it's a lot, and that's why you have 3 hours of, and I'm not saying it's going to take you 3 hours, but that's why we're not doing a class, because I want to give you the, you know, like that's your time. I will also tell you that there's going to be one other class, I think it's session 8, that we will also not be meeting. So that's another 3 hours in your column to, you know, work on this Be a Myth project, right? So you know, technically we don't want to have you do a ton of work outside of the class. That's why I'm basically, you know, giving you 2 classes to just sort of work on stuff. Okay. Questions around this, because this, if you want to ask me, you're going to have to reach out to me in, you know, pet K-12 email and ask me questions, because it's I will be up, like I said, I will open the Zoom up on the 6th of January. So if you have any questions on this, feel free to, you know, we can Zoom. But do you have any questions as now? Let me stop sharing. Do you have any questions as they stand right now? All right. All right. So let me then go back to share, and we'll get this thing finished up, y'all. All right. So homework. Let's kind of wrap our heads around what's what. What's due Monday, January 6th, is the formative assessment for tonight. And here's what the formative assessment is. I ask you, based on what we explored in session 5 around academic language demand, syntax, and the example that you added, you might have added to the table on slide 23, how might you support your students in approaching challenging syntax? So challenging long sentences, really descriptive passages. What strategy or strategies might you use to support them in the challenging syntax that your text has? What strategies might you use to support them in, you know, a long word problem where kind of the information is buried in there, kind of thing? What strategies might you use? And then what was a key learning for you from session 5? Okay. So those are the 2 prompts, and those are due by January 6th. And then what's due by January 12th is your formative assessment that we just went over for session 6, right? That we're not having. And part 1 of the final project, the lesson plan. All right. And then also, I didn't put it on here, but what's due into your curriculum 282 is the evidence, right? Is your video, or your, you know, 2 videos, or your video and student work. So, all right. And then here I just have for our last slide, week 6 is independent, but asterisk, I will open a Zoom from 5 to 5:20 on January 6th for questions or for assistance. Okay. Questions on anything, assistance on anything. It doesn't have to be just on, you know, that independent, you know, week 6 work. It doesn't have to even be on the, you know, the final project. It's just whatever. So I will open that up, and yeah. All right. So I'm going to stop share. And at this point, I'm also going to stop the recording because I don't think we need to have that anymore. Let's see.